Welcome to Tim's Garage. So I'm finally now getting to look at some of the cooling system issues with the little Solstices and Skies, and it turns out that there's a problem with water pumps surviving on these cars. And there's a whole bunch of reasons that people are speculating about why they fail. It could be that the coolant gets old, gets corrosive, and the seals fail. It could be that the cars wind up with an airlock and run consistently at too high a temperature. Or maybe air gets into where the pump is and it cavitates, and when the car sits, it causes the seal to fail because it dries out. There's all kinds of speculation. With that said, I personally decided I was going to sit down and figure out, okay, there's three things I should really upgrade on the cooling system. One would be a water pump. Two would be the check valves from GM, and I have three of those little check valves right here because I normally want to just keep a spare so that I've got an additional one in case I need it. And three will be to upgrade the radiator, and I'll show an image in the video of the radiator that I'm going to go with. It's about double the capacity. I happen to be getting a Griffin radiator from RPM Motorsports, and I'll show an image of that here in the video so you can see what it looks like. I may even show a little bit of a video of the modifications that I need to make apparently to the fan shroud assembly to be able to fit to the radiator as I do it. But for today, I'm just going to talk about water pumps and the difference in the water pumps. As I started searching online, there was a whole bunch of different variations of the water pumps and the way you can buy them. And at this point, because my car has 8,000 miles on it, I'm not going to be changing out the water pump, at least not yet. So since I can change a water pump with the turbo in place, I'm likely just going to leave the water pump alone for now. And if it fails, well, I've got some extra work to do later. But in the meantime, I thought maybe other people would like to figure out what I found out online as I started to do this research. And there's a couple of things. So I've got four items in front of me. I've got a Gates water pump, which is this unit here, which is a replacement water pump assembly. I have an AC Delco water pump assembly, which came out of this box and is located here. I've got the OTC GM water pump holding tool, which I highly recommend. And the reason I recommend this particular tool is the bolts that hold it. Number one, it completely covers the opening when you bolt it in place, and the bolts are captured with little C-clips. And these C-clips prevent the bolts from falling out and potentially falling down into the oil pan, which I've had a couple of Sky owners say that had happened to them. So one point about using this particular tool is that once you have the inspection cover off, make sure you bolt this 100% securely to the vehicle. And the goal is to make sure that when it's mounted on the front of the engine, that it can't drop down a little bit and cause any slack in the timing chain. If that were to happen, when you reassemble your water pump, you're going to have a whine sound within the front timing cover. And that's going to mean you're going to have to pull the entire front of the engine off, pull the timing cover off, and then pull the tensioner. There's a little spring-loaded tensioner that's mounted down low on the timing cover, and you're going to have to pull that tensioner off, take the plunger, rotate it 90 degrees, press it in, rotate it back 90 degrees, and then put a little pin in to hold it so that it can stay under preload. Then mount everything back up the way you need to have it on the timing chain, and then after that, allow the preload to release itself by pulling the pin out of the preload tensioner. So what I'm going to say is, this particular one allows for you to bolt it completely securely to the inspection hole bolts, then to the three bolts that hold it into the gear, and then you can remove the three bolts that hold that gear to the water pump itself. That allows you to have it 100% secure. The gear won't move, and you won't have that problem of reassembling it and having the whine sound because the tensioner is too tight and it's starting to clearance all the plastic guide strips that are located in the front for the timing chain. And then the last thing is, when you change a water pump, the very best thing you can do is go and get yourself a full gasket set, which includes the inspection cover gasket, both the O-rings for the transfer tube for the water pump, along with additional gaskets for the water pump itself. You're buying a little bit extra in terms of gaskets, but the Fel-Pro gaskets have always worked well for me, and that seems to be a good thing. But the majority of my conversation today is going to be on the differences between these two water pumps. And in the instance here, The Gates water pump comes as a completely assembled unit. It's got a gear located on the front for the timing chain, because these water pumps are powered by the timing chain. And it's already got a rear cover mounted onto the pump assembly that encapsulates the whole back area, and you don't have to reuse the other pump. This particular pump cover comes off fairly easily, and it's already got the seal located inside it. It's already been installed and mounted on the pump. But what I wanted to talk about was some of the things that I noticed that were very different. Now, the factory GM pump, as far as I know, has strictly an impeller that is just a flat piece of tin cut in a kind of a star pattern and flipped up. And in this case, it has 7 impeller blades inside this little assembly. The factory pump does not have this little disc mounted on it. This disc is missing on the factory pump, and I believe that creates an opportunity for a lot of cavitation in the factory setup. Now, it may be that the proximity to the case, which is this piece here, the mounting case, this surface right here might be close enough to where those blades spin that it's not a concern. For me personally, I like the approach that the AC Delco pump does with this. But first, let's just talk about the differences between the two pumps. The Gates pump has a nylon or plastic impeller that seems to be pressed or bonded to a shaft that's located down around the shaft here. Now, this particular assembly, it's a plastic impeller, and it seems nice and tight, and it moves just fine. And the AC Delco one has a steel impeller, and the steel impeller, to me, obviously would be a heck of a lot more durable than a plastic one, but I'm not certain that that makes a big difference. I will say that this particular impeller, the Gates one, looks to be better designed from a flow standpoint with curved vanes, 8 impeller blades versus 7 impeller blades, and it looks like it's designed to flow quite a bit better in the way it's designed and deliver the coolant out of the impeller. On the one over here, the AC Delco one has this steel blade that creates a contained area inside the impeller, but it just has flat blades, which are very different than if you look at the Gates one, has nicely curved vanes, which my guess is would perform a little bit better in terms of how it flows and moves coolant. The drawback to me, personally, is just that it's made out of plastic. Now, I may be completely off the wall with the fact that it's got a plastic impeller. I just like steel. And the upgrade onto the AC Delco pump that I like is that back in the 60s, which is the era I came from, and drag racing and things, on the Chevrolet water pumps and the Ford water pumps, there was an upgrade you could buy called a flow cooler, and it was a disc that got riveted to the impeller blade that enclosed the impeller blade and created a closed centrifugal pump, basically, just like this. And they increased the flow, or the ability for that water pump to pump coolant through the system, because it eliminated a lot of the cavitation that occurred along the top edge of the pump. So, and as we're looking at this, I'm not saying good or bad, but if I'm picking at this point, I would lean towards the metal pump. Now, in the castings between the two different units, there are some differences. When you start looking at the castings, the machine surface here, there's barely any machine surface, and I know that doesn't matter. It's just a variation in the way it's cast. But when you start to look at how the Gates pump is cast compared to the AC Delco pump, the AC Delco pump seems to be cast with a lot more precision than what the Gates pump is. If you look at the roughness and the randomness that this is all cast with, and you start to look at how the external casting on the pump looks, it just looks a little less finished on the Gates pump versus the AC Delco pump, similarly on the back side. And they've got a little bit of a different location for the exits of the drainage that might happen in the water pump when it starts to leak. So the location of those exits is a little different. I don't think that matters for the function of the pump. But there is one other thing. So as I was looking at this, the machining that's done on the insides of the bore and the casting variances that occur When we look down here and we notice this nice beautiful edge that's nicely machined that's right here, it's got a nice lip. When you compare that to the Gates pump, it's almost been machined off. There is no edge left there. And in fact, the casting variances here lead a very irregular surface. Now, from a flow standpoint, having a knife edge here is probably a good thing because it would seal right up against the inside of this particular tank, and it would actually make it look like it might flow just a little bit better because it's got a little bit less in the way. But given the volume of the opening, I don't think that's a concern because it's got a great big opening in it. So as I looked at this and looked at these two different pumps, the more and more I looked at them, despite the fact that I'm going to have to transfer some components and reuse the old back plate off my old pump, to me, I think I'm likely, when I do change my water pump, I'm probably going to go with the AC Delco pump. It just, to me, and it may be unfounded, but I like the idea of the metal plate that's on the back. So I'll carry on. So that's kind of looking at the water pumps and contrasting the two differences. And I'll include an image of the factory GM pump with the impeller that it looks like, that's just an open impeller. So you can get a different look of all the different pumps and understand what they are. So to give you an idea, this particular pump is the AC Delco pump number 252-821. The GM number that's on this pump is 890-36356. And the Gates pump part number that we're using over here is a 43529. So the pump assembly, and my guess is it would be just fine. One other thing that I noticed that's a little bit concerning is the machining that occurred on this side in here, inside the casting. The GM pump was cast and it has a beautiful cast finish all on the inside of this groove, allowing the seal that's going to drop in there to seal nicely. This groove over here looks like it was machined by CNC, but the CNC machining was a little rough here, and you can feel a pretty, I don't know if you can hear it or not, but there's a pretty significant bump that the seal is going to have to make up for as it gets squished down into the surface. Now, I think the seal will. I don't think there's any problem with it leaking, but it just looks to me like it may have been finished just a little bit better, especially as compared to the AC Delco pump that has, you know, a beautiful bed for the seal to sit in. So that said, that's a comparison on the water pumps. I'll come back and talk to you when I get started with the with these check valves and I insert those in the hoses. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Please like and share and subscribe if you haven't done that already. Appreciate you watching.